you get into the investing world, and now you're an applicant at ADB in the YPP, the Young Professionals Program. What is YPP?
So YPP stands for Young Professionals Program, and so most, if not every, international organization has a Young Professionals Program.
Right.
So IMF, World Bank, EBRD, ADB, WHO, etc. These organizations' version of a management leadership rotational program. And so you join as a junior in the organization. And it's a 3-year program where you are given the opportunity to rotate through different parts of the bank to see how different parts of the bank operate, what interests you, where you may want to end up eventually in the bank. Typically people who join the bank stay at the bank for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so this gives, the young professionals, is what they call them, the opportunity to figure out where they want to spend, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years in the bank. And then they can stay there forever until they retire or until they decide to leave the bank. Or they can also, at a certain point, go to a different part of the bank. So that's generally what the program is.
What do you think that was what differentiated you from the other 3,600 people who were applying for this program?
So actually having a sort of a weird background was probably in my favor at the time, because typically there's a certain type of person they look for. Traditionally, before they had put out the posting for my cohort for the YPP, the way that the program worked for applications was they collected all applications into one pool, one general pool. So the post would go out for the Young Professionals Program, and everyone would apply to that post. And then HR would collect those applications and sort through them and say who needs a YP, who wants a YP. And then they would pick people with the right backgrounds from that general pool, depending on which departments, which teams were going to get a head count. And the requirements for that general pool, you have to have a master's degree, you have to have a PhD, depending on what sort of field you were, or what sort of specialized position you were going for. They would not hire bachelor's degrees. The year that I applied was the one year where they decided they wanted to collect separate applications for separate teams or positions.
Interesting.
And so I applied for a position that was specific for the venture capital team that was being created as a new team within ADB. And so I think when they were looking at the applicants, maybe they were looking for someone who doesn't really have a conventional background, right? Having a venture team within ADB is by itself unconventional. And so it's possible they didn't want someone really with a cookie cutter background for development banking to come into that role. They also valued the fact that I had founder experience and operational experience in a developing country, and then some investing experience on top of that.
So clicking.
Yeah, so it wasn't intentional that I built my career in that way, leading up to that point in time, but all of that did help, right? And so I think that was part of why I was able to get selected into that role.
Yeah, well, clearly none of this. You probably didn't know what ADB was early on in your career.
No, so actually, okay, so maybe you should cut this out. But I actually didn't know what ADB was until my friend was like, "Hey, you should apply for this program at ADB." And my friend at the time, I knew him from Nigeria as well, so it sort of ties together. But he worked at the time for EBRD, which is a European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So it's it's a Europe version of a development bank. And so he was working there. And he was like, you should, I think he told me he thought I had a good shot. And I actually asked him why. He was like, "Oh, you're Asian. You should apply for the Asian Development Bank."
Great reasoning.
I mean, he's French, so he's like,
You're Asian.
It's like stuff that like these guys sometimes say.
That's so funny.
And so I actually went to that night. I went to the hiring portal, and the application was due the next day. So I actually applied for that role that night, and submitted it that night.
Wow.
Yeah,
A lot of serendipity there too.
yeah.
Right.
So a lot of it is serendipity. A lot of it is time. If I like not looked at the job portal until the next morning, I would be in a completely different place career-wise today.
Right. And I guess I think to give the viewers a little bit of the scale of competition that you have, like the backgrounds and profiles of the people you're competing against are people from working at MBB or, bulge bracket investment banks and top tier MBAs.
PhD from like prestigious school.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is generally the pool. So I think that 3,600 number is all eligible applicants. And by eligible, I mean, the minimum requirements.
Right. Under a certain age, with
under
a certain
age, with the citizenship of a membership country, et cetera, right? Who applied and submitted it on time.
Yeah.
Out of those people, a lot of them probably were, had the profile that you described. And I, to be honest, did not expect to get past the first stage. But I got a response, and they said, you made it past the screening stage. Please now do these next things. And these next things were like, you have to take an IQ test.
Oh, what?
Yeah, you have to take an IQ test. It's like, one of those pattern matching things. It was the hardest one I'd ever taken.
Wow.
It was so hard. And I practiced for these IQ tests. I went online and I looked up practice tests. And this one was multiples harder than the hardest practice test I took.
Oh, wow.
And so I actually took that pattern matching test, and I was like, I'm not. I'm not getting this job. So that was one portion, and then you have to take a personality test, like a psychometric test. Yeah. You have to answer like a bunch of short essay questions, and then once you get past that, they invite you for a written exam. That you sort of sit down, and when it turns, time, it becomes a time that you take the test. You enter the page and they give you a topic, and you have 20 minutes to write about that topic. And when I did it, it was a topic about the job, venture capital. The way I prepared for that written test, I came up with 3 potential questions they might ask me. And I wrote essays for each of these questions. And it turns out the question they gave me was a question that I thought they may give me. And so I was able to write a pretty comprehensive, in my opinion, answer. And then after that, there was a phone interview with one of the hiring managers on the team. And then after that, once you get through that, they invite 3 final candidates for each position to Manila for an in-person interview. That was my first time in Manila at the ADB HQ.
While you were there, you were in the venture, so you got to experience the venture team and then private equity as well as other...
Yeah, so I joined originally through the venture team. And when I joined, it was COVID. ADB had closed their offices around the world, except for China, because China had things operating within their own borders. They should just close the borders off to the rest of the world. So I joined through the venture capital team, and then I was working from home for about a year. And then my boss at the time said, would you be interested in working with people in an office? And I said, sure. Better experience overall to work with people in person, especially as a new joiner in an organization like ADB. So I got sent to China. So I spent 7 months in China. I was supposed to be there for a year, but I left early because of business trip that I had to partake in. I left the country and it would have been too difficult to go back into the country after that. And so I was in China for a part of the program. And then I joined the risk department. So it's called the Office of Risk Management, where I was doing equity investment related risk analysis. And then I joined the digital office, where I was working on conceptualizing a regional venture capital focused fund of funds in Central West Asia. And then I ended up joining Office of Markets Development and Partnerships. And then in my last position was for private equity.
So, we actually started out being a VC around the same time. But, I left the world after 2 years, and I have a whole video about why I did that. You've stuck around, and I'm curious, what what is it that you think kept you in the industry, and why did you enjoy the day-to-day, working with founders?
I think founders and investors, there's a lot of founders who become investors, and there's a lot of investors who become founders. But I think they're very different. People who stick around or in either industry for a very long time, like serial founders versus long-term investors, are very different breeds of people. For me, I enjoy capital allocation and supporting portfolio companies and my founders more than saying building a single thing. For me, one of my most powerful tools in my sort of arsenal as an investor has been empathy, and having experience as a founder, successful or non-successful, has been very important. When I work with founders. And I support the founders, and there's a lot of investors that don't necessarily have empathy for the founders, and it just makes a big difference for a lot of founders.
What's like an example of like an empathetic moment that someone who's actually gone through the process can have?
I've talked with founders where they come to me and they're like, we're in a tight spot, and we need help on X, Y, Z, and instead of really sort of sitting down and actually brainstorming or actually trying to figure out, how to get through that moment together with the founder, there are certain investors that may just be like, well, figure it out, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't really spend the time to, sit down with the founders to actually, think through what the issue is and try to figure out what a solution might be. And you can't really do that if you don't have empathy. Right. At least on my end, I know like being a founder it's a very lonely job. And your investors are people that you're supposed to trust the most in some sense, but they're also the people that you don't want to reveal too much to at the same time. And, that's not really healthy, right? A founder and an investor doesn't have to be on the same side all the time. Their opinions can differ, but you need to be able to communicate properly, and empathy helps a lot with that. If founder feels like their investor doesn't have empathy for them, they're not going to be able to communicate effectively with them. And I think a lot of companies go bankrupt, or a lot of companies shut down because, let's say, an investor knows about an issue in the company too late. And can't help with them, or a founder sits on a problem for a long time and it's too late to do anything about it. And so I found that it's been a very important thing that I've been able to use because of my experience as a founder.
So across this winding path of different careers, and now you're from founder to operator to investor, what would be your advice to our viewers who are still trying to navigate how to navigate their career in their 20s?
Number one, you figure out what you do have in your possession, in your arsenal, right? What are you good at? What experience do you have? And you figure out, what your interests are, and you link the two together. Based on that, you look for opportunities that you think have high upside potential. It's possible that the upside never materializes. It's actually probably more likely that the upside potential never materializes. But, if you're shooting for, and this is sort of the VC in me speaking, is if you're shooting, even with, as an investor, you shoot for outsized outcomes, right? But if you're doing the same for your career, where you're like optimizing for big outcomes, even if they don't materialize, there's going to be a ton of things that you learn, and you're going to be able to use that in your next step in the career, in your career. And that's how I've sort of formulated my career, is from a high level view, some of these steps may not look coherent, but if you look at, if you look at them individually, they may not look like they are linked together. But if you look at them from sort of high level view, like you said, it's founder to operator to investor. And, my founder experience helps with what I do as an investor. My operational experience helps with what I do as an investor, whether that's looking at investment opportunities, whether that is working with founders, whether that's supporting portfolio companies, et cetera. And so if you sort of think about your career in that way, I think eventually you will find success, or eventually you will find that you are in a dream job, that you're like, oh, I never expected to be working my dream job this way, or I never expected my current job to be my dream job, but you end up in that sort of end goal position.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you're Today we learned about Minsoo's story, where I think this is how becoming a VC should be done. We do have another video where I talk about my experience of going from a BCG consultant to a venture capitalist. I think that's maybe not the best way to do it is there, so please check that out. And yeah, until next time.